things that, like products and services that could actually have commercial value. And that means that from a career perspective, quantum is in a really interesting place because it's got a foot in both academia and industry, and advances in the field are being driven in both camps and also by partnerships between both camps, especially by the many spin-outs that have come out over the last few years. So over the conference, we've seen a lot of people asking questions along the lines of, do I need a PhD to get into this field? What skills should I be focusing on and building? What's the best way that I can contribute, or the best place that I can contribute in? And this panel is kind of our attempt to try to address some of those questions. So the point of the panel is to get a sense of the different perspectives and needs of academia and industry, how those differ, and also how they're the same and how they can work together. And to help guide you, the participants in the conference, in how to shape your own career paths. So without further ado, I'll introduce our 4 panelists for this session. So first up, there's Dr. Ben Miles of Spin Up Science. Give us a wave, Ben. There's Dr. Maksym of AegiQ, Dr. Renema of Quix, and last but not least, Dr. McCutcheon of the University of Bristol and Duality Quantum Photonics. So just to kick the panel off, I'm just going to give everyone a chance to introduce themselves and then ask some questions so that you, the audience, get to know who they are and the background that they have so that you can direct your questions towards that. So Ben, can you kick us off by just sort of giving us a really quick summary of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the intro, Alex. My name's Ben. I'm the CEO of a company called Spin Up Science. We try and prepare master's students, PhD students, and postdocs for the wonderful world outside of academia, with general bits of upskilling across kind of commercial skills and entrepreneurial skills. And we also support academic founding teams that are trying to take some discovery that they've found in the lab and turn it into a company.
Fantastic. Max, would you like to go next?
Yes, so yeah, thanks very much for inviting, and it's great to see such a vibrant event. So my background is, well, to start with, I'm CEO and co-founder of AegiQ. So AegiQ is a spin-off from University of Sheffield. So we've started a couple of years ago, and we work on quantum photonics and applications based on single photons. So my background is quantum physics. So I did my PhD and some years of postdoc in the field of semiconductors generally. I also have a degree in economics and finance, and yeah, and now I'm running the company.
Fantastic, thanks for that. Jelmer?
Hi everyone, my name is Renema. I'm the CTO of Quix. We are a company located in Enschede in the Netherlands, and we make the world's largest quantum photonic processors in integrated photonics. I did my undergrad and PhD in Leiden, then moved to the UK, where I had the pleasure of occasionally visiting Bristol in real life when that was still a thing. I did my, as I said, I did my postdoc in Oxford in the group of Ian Walmsley, moved back to the Netherlands, started as an assistant professor at the University of Twente, and founded Quix in January 2019.
Thank you, Jelmer. What even is real life anymore? I don't think I remember.
Sorry?
Dara, would you mind telling us about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thanks, Alex. So, well, actually, yeah. So the name of this panel, a crossover panel, is quite suitable for my situation because I'm in the middle of crossing over from being an academic in Bristol University to working for a company. So until a couple of months ago, I was a full-time academic in Bristol University, a lecturer with the quantum engineering CDT the students of which are bringing us this great workshop. So I was doing research and teaching there, and for about 6 months I was the co-director of the CDT along with Jorge, who you heard from this morning. A few months ago, I started working part-time for Duality Quantum Photonics. So I'm the head of photonics theory there. And as the name might suggest, at Duality, we're looking to develop special purpose quantum photonic processors. So right now I'm really in the middle of things, kind of working part-time in both of these jobs. In a couple of months, I'm going full-time with the company, and I'm really looking forward to that. So yeah, thanks.
Fantastic. So let's just kick off with some easy questions about yourselves. So conspicuously, every single panelist here today has a PhD. So how about we start with, what was your PhD about? Just quickly. Ben, would you mind starting us off?
Yeah, sure. I'm a physicist by background, as I imagine pretty much everyone here is also some sort of description. I did my PhD at the University of Bristol after finishing my master's, also at the University of Bristol, didn't go far. I was building a new microscopy technique called interferometric cross-polarization microscopy, which is essentially to look at small nanoparticles of gold as they made their way through different cell bodies. But mine was very much like an experimentalist PhD. I was building the equipment and then pretending that I knew enough biology to actually do something useful with it. But yeah, did I answer your question, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely, Ben. Aren't we all just pretending that we know enough? Max, you have a particularly interesting background, especially to a lot of the attendees, because your undergraduate degree was actually not in sort of like a obviously quantum related field. So do you mind explaining a bit more about that and about how—
I have two undergrad degrees, you see. So the first undergrad was actually in quantum physics. It was applied quantum physics. But then I did like a distance learning one. So my PhD was in polaritons. So some people might know what it is, but it's kind of a strong coupling regime between photons and excitons in semiconductors. So I did like nonlinear physics and solitons was those, and then I moved on to you know, looking at different materials, the working quantum field a little bit more. But I should say, you know, I think my research isn't directly the thing that we're doing in the company, so that's perhaps the outcome of that.
Brilliant. That's a great line for a future question from one of the audience. Yelmo, would you mind telling us a bit about your PhD?
Yeah, my PhD was in between quantum physics and research.
Sorry, just a little bit of audio disturbance.
Maybe better like this?
Much better, thank you.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so I did my PhD sort of in the middle between quantum physics and more traditional condensed matter research. It was on superconducting single photon detectors. And I looked at the physics of the detection mechanism in these sort of very tiny, very thin nanowires that we all use, I guess, these days to detect single photons.
Right. Yeah, highly relevant research there. Dara, and how about you?
Yeah, so my PhD, so yeah, that finished back in 2010. So that was in open quantum systems. So it's a very sort of like theoretical PhD. I mean, I'm still a theorist, but I would say my theory is much more sort of applied theory now, you might say. So it was kind of in open quantum systems. And then at some point, I think when I was doing a postdoc in Denmark, I kind of got into modeling kind of specific systems. So like quantum dots in particular, and how they're used, how we can use them for single photon sources. And then kind of from there, my research kind of became more kind of theoretical quantum optics. And I'd say that's kind of what my focus is now.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so now just a question to all the panelists. How long have you personally been interested in quantum? Was it from since you were a small child, or is it maybe more recent than that? Ben, do you want to pick us up again?
Sure, yeah. I don't know if it was quite from a small child, but it was probably close. I've always been pretty interested in it. I mean, I would consider myself more of an optical physicist than a quantum physicist by background, but quantum was where the obvious jobs of interest were for me as I kind of emerged from the PhD and started looking looking around, and you know, there are some in Bristol in particular notable spin-out companies that have come, and that really interested me. I really was interested in how do we take ideas that are very fresh, very new in the lab, and actually make them into something useful that sits in the outside world. That's like the bit of quantum that I find most fascinating, that there are so few people around at the moment that really understand like the full capability of things that can be done or things that can be realized. But equally that with that kind of skill set, it also requires to have some kind of commercial awareness of where like the actual valuable problems are to start tackling and in what order and how kind of feasible they are. So I really like, how do we translate the things that we've learned from quantum into something that is actually applicable, realizable in a reasonable time frame, and has hopefully some like impact on the world, commercial or otherwise.
Right, brilliant. Max?
Yeah, so I guess I mean quantum. It wasn't a particular point in time when I started thinking about quantum. You know, if you do an undergrad in physics, you obviously come across quantum pretty early on, but it's generally towards the end of the courses, because that's historically the kind of the one of the last things that happened, and it's kind of the thing that you know, the exciting thing that everybody kind of, you end up with it. So it's almost like a natural thing to have, and then it's into, you know, it's not, quantum isn't a thing of its own, right? It's part of pretty much every other discipline, and you can find links there. So, you know, it was never like a transition. It's just something that evolves naturally, and you know, electrons have been around and known around for a long time. You know, we're talking about 100 years now of quantum, except that the quantum tech, as we know now, that this generation of technologies is kind of new, but it's a particular wave of quantum, right? It's not very new.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to remember that. Yama, how about you?
Well, for me, it was, I mean, I guess a little bit the same as Maksym. So I didn't really, I sort of had sort of a general interest in physics, you know, and then during undergrad, you sort of eventually realized that quantum is one of the areas where it's happening. I think also there is maybe a difference between the people who did their PhD, let's say, 10 years ago compared to the people who are doing their PhD now, is that, you know, the first, you know, when I started on my PhD, there was a handful of quantum companies, right? There was, you know, AegiQ, and there was D-Wave, and there were maybe a few more, but it definitely wasn't the situation that we have now, where almost every university with a serious quantum technology research program has a couple of spin-outs. So I think in that sense, the potential was maybe much less visible at the time than it is now.
Yeah, and for me, well, I guess if we're saying quantum as in just quantum physics, I mean, I think I was 16. It was at the start of my A-levels. I remember I wasn't even doing physics as one of my A-levels for a few months. So I don't know. I didn't know I liked it, and I spoke to my friend who was taking it, and he said they were talking about quantum physics, and he described it like an electron could just go along like this and then go backwards. That isn't quite right, of course, but it kind of like ignited something in me, and I said, I just thought I've really got to go and learn about this. So yeah, for me, it was a good 20 years ago that I got into quantum physics.
Brilliant. Okay, one last softball question before we get into the meaty ones from the audience. What motivates you? What is it that sort of drives you in your career and gets you to get out of bed each morning?
Is it my turn first? I was just, well, after you, Max. I don't think I need to go first every time.
No worries. Well, I mean, I had a really simple answer, actually. It's challenge and adventure. I think I make, you know, when you start a company in the venture, I really like to make a comparison between, you know, the age of sail. So when you start a company or a startup, what you're building is basically an expedition ship, and you're just about to sail across the ocean, God knows where, but you probably are sailing for gold.
I like that mentality. I think, and also kind of you reflect there's like a lot of similarity, synergy, whatever, between being like a researcher and being like an entrepreneur. Also, like you are very much doing like a reasonably risky, not sure what's at the end of it, but you hope it's something good, and it's largely like self-directed up until that point. That's kind of what I enjoy. I like the fact that most of what my job is building something out of nothing, which is like quite exciting. I mean, I can't honestly say that I've ever done a day of work, which is nice in my kind of current role. Largely, I just pick directions that I think are interesting for us as a business, and for myself to like explore. So it stays very like fresh kind of day to day. But really, like what I'm motivated by on the underpinning is the fact that when I emerged from the PhD, I had literally no useful skills to the world other than optical physics behind me. And I actually felt that like permeation into the job market to be incredibly difficult, and got unbelievably lucky with where I like ended up and the journey that I had beyond that point. So my motivation is to make sure that doesn't happen to other people, and they're slightly better aware of what the pathway looks like ahead, and more usefully upskilled. Yeah, that's my answer.
I think for me, it's two things. It's building something. I think that's really an important aspect of it, right? We are a hardware company, right? So we really have, someone literally just walked past my office with the world's most advanced quantum photonic processor in his hands. Right. So, I mean, that's like a really nice thing to have, that you have devices that, you're really working as a team, making something that wasn't there before. And I think the other thing that drives me very much is the amazing team of people that we have assembled. I think that's one of the things. Right, if you go into industry, especially in a sort of leading role, it becomes much more a people job than your PhD has ever been. Right, so there's sort of, it's just great to have this very motivated team that is building these amazing things.
Yeah, and I think I would sort of echo some of what the rest of you have said. I think maybe for me, I think I just really like the problem solving. I like sitting down either on my own or with a group of people, just trying to work something out. And kind of like Ben said, like if you're doing something like that, it doesn't really feel much like work. There are hard times and there are challenging times, but I just really enjoy that. And to sort of echo something that Jelmer said, I think it's very gratifying to know that, like, whether this is in academia or in industry or something, like nobody can say you're not doing something, right? There's a real kind of product out there, whether that's kind of like physical or more of a management tool or something. We're actually kind of doing something that I think is really meaningful and it's exciting, and that's what gets me out of bed in the morning and motivates me.
All right, thank you. Great introductions, everyone. Hopefully the audience has now got a sense of who you are. I'm going to hand over to Dara in a moment to chair the rest of the session. Just a reminder to the audience that you can ask questions in the Q&A, and also upvote the questions in there which you think are most interesting and relevant to you, so that we can prioritize them and get to them first. Again, the panel is about the crossover between academia and industry. So it's about talking about the differences and similarities between them, about the experience of physically sort of transferring from one to the other, and also about the kind of different sort of cultures and expectations and values that they have. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass over to Dal to chair the rest of the session, and I'll see you all again in about 35 minutes.
All right, thank you, Alex. Yeah, so like Alex said, yeah, I'm going to be sort of like I'm kind of half chairing here and half on the panel. I'll think of some questions and I'll chime in with my answers as well when they're relevant. So we've got some questions in the Q&A. I kind of wanted to exploit my position here as chair and kind of ask a question that I'm interested in. Well, first of all, let me say a little story. So, you know, as you might imagine, for a few years, I might have become increasingly frustrated with academia, and as you know, I'm kind of transitioning to work in a company, and there are various reasons behind that. But actually, it was you, Yelma. So, at the Careers in Quantum last year, you gave a talk about the kind of relative merits of both sectors, and you put up this image saying that. In a company, you're kind of like a concert violinist. So you have to be really, really good at playing the violin. And that's kind of your job. And whereas in academia, you're like a one-man band and you're trying to play every instrument simultaneously, whether you kind of like it or not. And for actually, it might surprise you to hear, but this was the kind of thing that for me, I said to myself, I want to be that concert violinist, actually.
Well, I'm just very glad to hear that my talk had some impact.
It did.
That's very gratifying. Thank you.
So I guess maybe I don't wish this to sound like too much of a controversial question, but maybe my question is kind of like, you know, what, if anything, frustrated you about academia when you were in it the most? So I think for me, it was this kind of expectation that I had to be a one-man band of teaching, kind of research, admin, supervision, all of these things. And, you know, I think all of those things are important, but it frustrated me that I was kind of expected to do all of them equally well and wasn't really given enough time to do all of them equally well, frankly.
Well, and I think there is another thing that comes on top of that is it's not just that you're a one-man band, but it's also that you're judged as an individual for your performance in all of these roles, right? So I mean, I do also have a job at the university, right? So I'm a little bit, you know, talking with two hats on in this discussion. But it's within a company, because you can do this specialization, it's much clearer that you're all on the same team. And also you're not, you know, of course, there are, you know, performance reviews annually and so on, right? But you're not, at least from the outside, you're not judged as individuals, right? The company is successful as a whole, or not. Mm-hmm. And within a university, that's very different, right? The university is eternal, right? It's always been there and it always will be there. But it's the people within the university who individually have to go to the dean and explain why they are bringing in less research money than their neighbor, right? And I think that is sort of a very frustrating aspect of this. And, you know, we have fortunately had a little bit of political backlash against this here in the Netherlands, but I don't think that this changes the fundamental. It doesn't change the fundamental picture very much. I think that this is really, you know, this is what you hear from a lot of people, that this is the thing that annoys them about academia.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. Ben and Max, do you want to add anything on that before we move on?
The old, go on, Max.
No, you go now, because I keep jumping in front of you.
That's fine. I think the old controversial, let's have a whinge about academia is a deep topic that many of us have indulged in. So I'll try and keep it like light and sensible. I think what always frustrated me about academia was the pace. And yeah, absolutely, to kind of re-emphasize the point, the fact that if I was moving through a career beyond that point, I was going to be applying for grants as me, the individual, not me, the fantastic team that I had managed to cobble together around me. And I really didn't like the kind of impermanence of you know, postdocs drifting in and out of groups of PhDs being there for only a little while and maybe not being quite, you know, occasionally, not myself, treated as, you know, the cheap commodities that they are to do the grunt work. I think there's a lot about the system that probably could do with refining. I think the bit that really I started to really appreciate when moving into the industry side was that you can't get away with any of the silly stuff that you can get away with in academia in industry, because people quit, people leave, and bad managers hopefully kind of get weaned out because people start leaving or people start complaining or any of those things. But there's a lot of kind of inertia within the academic system, which means even if there are bright sparks that want to make moves, make changes, and really want to help and refine the system, there's so much like layers of bureaucracy that they need to fight through to actually have something impactful come as a result. I mean, it's exactly what you were just saying. Like, you know, it's been there for 100 years before you, it's been there for many 100 years after you. So it's hard to feel like you can make an impact there. And the bit that I really liked when I sat in a startup company was like, oh, I'm, you know, one of 5 people. I am absolutely crucial to this thing surviving. And if you know my skill sets aren't up to par, then we suffer as a team and as an entity, and maybe don't raise investment or don't get paid by customers or whatever it is. So really, like, that was huge motivation to kind of up my game and develop all the skill sets that really I found interesting. And that sort of same pressure is kind of there in academia, but it's applied through strange mechanisms, like how many papers have you produced, or did you go talk at a conference, or does this guy like you, or, you know, any of those weird things. Feels much less actionable, which always kind of frustrated me. Max, over to you, sorry.
Yeah, I can be very critical of academia as well, but I'll actually stand here to defend it a little bit. Just for the sake of it, that somebody has to say something good. I think a lot of frustration that comes in academia is actually just the frustration that comes with large organizations. Try working in a company that has 10,000 employees. You'll find the same thing. I mean, not the same, but there will be the same KPIs that's been, you know, coming from somewhere. And we're not talking about like an exciting company, I don't know, like Google, for example, but an old bank or something like that that's struggling to survive. It's a sort of steady job. You know, you can probably live with it your life. You can have your life career there, but you know, you'll be delivering some funny KPIs through your life, and you'll be playing the system there potentially. You know, and then there will be the cases of harassment, the cases, all this stuff. They're absolutely rife in this environment. So it's more like, I guess, you know, the comparison that people often try to make is like the best case, you know, exciting startup you might have, which does happen, versus, you know, maybe a pretty doomed case somewhere in academia. And, you know, it's just different rules that you play by.
Yeah.
And,
no,
you know, there's plenty of, you know, successful academics who were, you know, some were lucky. I mean, luck is always there for in any case, you know, business, academia, life in general, who managed to pull it through. I mean, it's really competitive, and who are absolutely bright stars. So, you know, that's also the reality, and it's just different purposes after all. I mean, the reason why academia is like that is so that it's protective against some crazy ideas that might turn out to be something absolutely superb.
Yeah. And I think also, okay, I don't want to refer too much to my presentation of 2 years ago, because I suppose there's no one in the audience except Dara who has seen that. But I was, you know, I think that you should think about this much more. You shouldn't think about this in terms of which environment is best, right? Because there is no such notion as best in this kind of thing, right? It's much more, what environment is an environment in which you as a person will flourish, right? And I also, you know, I know people who are just made for this very individualistic, you know, very competitive academic environment, right? And if that's, you know, if you're sitting now in the audience, right, and you feel that that's you, then, you know, that's not something to be ashamed of, right? That's absolutely fine. So I think it's much more about finding, you know, where will you thrive as a person, than it is about us sitting here complaining about how academia is terrible, because we are also somehow a self-selecting sample, right? Because we have all chosen, at least with one foot, to step outside of academia. So, you know, of course, we are the people who have some gripes about it, right? So that's something that, you know, everyone who is listening should very much realize.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks everyone. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, yeah, for some people and indeed, you know, at some institutions, you know, it can be a really, really great career. And I mean, I loved it for years, in fact, and I'll be very sorry to kind of see it go. So yeah, everything here is, yeah, it's not a kind of, this one's the best. Yeah, it's just kind of different environments suit different people. So we've got a question from Naomi Solomons here, which is actually kind of related to this issue. So she asked whether do you think these issues are inherent to academia, or is it a problem with our current culture? Is it something we can improve or fix?
I think it will change, you know, it will change because everything changes, right? So we'll see things evolve, and you know, it just happens like that. So, but yeah, I think the answer was probably what German already said. You know, you have to pick the thing that's for you, and if you don't like it, don't do it, because there always will be frustration with something, and you know, there's more chances to be frustrated if you're, say, running a startup than having a postdoc. And when we say, well, postdocs are not permanent, well, I mean, startups not
I was
either.
going to say, right? Yeah.
You know, so that's you'll get enough. You'll find enough things to be frustrated with. It's just if you can outweigh them with the things you like when you do, and if you find that's your place.
Maybe just, I've got, I guess, a follow-up one for that. So one thing that kind of always strikes me as somewhat dysfunctional is the funding system in universities. So, I mean, we heard from people's talks this morning. I mean, Joe talked about all of it, you know, various kind of failed fellowship applications. I've got plenty of failed fellowship applications under my belt. And I mean, I've read lots of things to suggest that, in a sense, this is one of the worst ways to kind of foster creativity in thinking, is to kind of make people fiercely compete for the same pot of money and things. And people end up kind of doing safe work that, you know, sounds good to a funding body, but mightn't change the world. You know, they might know it's a kind of dead end, but it's quite a, you know, a good kind of funding application. So, and I suppose we also, you hear that things didn't used to be like this. Certainly it has been for as long as I can remember. I mean, do any of us see the sort of funding situation changing at all?
Yeah, I think at some point things have to get worse before they get better, right? And what you do see, for example, is the DORA declaration, right, where a lot of funding agencies are now banning the use of H indices, for example, to make it at least a little bit less of a sort of blatant, how many papers have you produced and how many of them are in Nature kind of thing. And I think, as I already alluded to earlier, there are also, you know, in various places, there are sort of various political lobbies going on. But I mean, I actually think, I mean, I don't want to go, you know, sit in your, you know, I don't want to tell the rest what we should talk about, but I think that, at least for me, the sort of the topic of, you know, complaining about academia has actually very little interest, to be honest. And we're almost already halfway through this panel, so I.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm happy to move on. So we've got a question here for the CEOs, or the CTOs, I suppose, as well. So Brandon Horsley asks, I think in terms of long-term career goals, I would like to be moving towards management with quantum technology companies. So how do the CEOs like their position, And do you have any advice on good skills to focus on?
I'm happy to chip in on that.
Yeah, please, Ben.
I think the disappointing thing about the world is that the world is by no means like a meritocracy. It's utterly dependent on how good you are at working with people. And like that is absolutely not really a skill set that is at the priority of what you try and develop over a PhD. I mean, I spent my PhD with the lights turned off in a room by myself for 4 years, like doing experiments. I like didn't become a good networker or a good public speaker as a result of those experiences. I think anything that you can do to build up that capability, you know, to sell your proposition, to build yourself a personal narrative, to look credible in the eyes of other people, not only as an academic with the appropriate vernacular, but someone that also can speak to like the commercial applications of things. That's a really, really important skill set to develop. And I think very few people actually can really fully command it, to have both like the business language as well as like the technical language. That's very rare. And I think like what's also reasonably rare are these like deep tech companies, these companies that are coming straight out of academia. We only really have them in Europe over the last like sort of 10, 15, maybe 20 years tops. They're still reasonably new because cheap infrastructure is hard to come by. Only very recently did the kind of first-time founder age actually start dropping significantly, because there's so much reasonable access to capital through the tax incentivization schemes that there are. So now's like all that to say, now is like literally the perfect time to take some leading edge capability and develop just a sufficient level of commercial awareness and opportunity spotting where you realize it into something. But what an investor will be looking at, or a partner will be looking at, or your co-founders or customer, or whoever, will be your ability to communicate that proposition, to work effectively with people, and to manage your team underneath you. And that just takes a little bit of time. So what I would say, develop those skills is literally anything you can. Like the more time you place in developing them, the better. Like go lead teams, run societies, join a sports club or something like that, and just like become very, very, very proficient at networking, like ludicrously proficient at networking. Because really what you're trying to do is expand your like surface area of serendipity, the likelihood that someone will have heard about you and be able to help you in some way, because that's how you arguably progress in any of these things. It's all kind of like circumstantial connections and being able to talk to people politely and ask them for some money to get your crazy idea started before you really know what you're doing. And it all comes down before your technology is proven to the only thing they have to cut on is how reliable do you seem as a human being. So great, you have the technical side, but they know you need the commercial kind of acumen also. So I would say develop the skills and the ability to work with people. Absolutely top thing I did not have at the end of the PhD, and took me probably 2 years to feel comfortable sitting in a startup before I launched my own company, when I was kind of ready to do those things than what everyone else thinks.
I completely concur. And I think that I would even go one step further, and I would say that, you know, serendipity, I think, really is the key word here. Right. And, you know, it's almost a little bit like the Douglas Adams thing, that the person who should be president of the galaxy is the person who least wants to be president of the galaxy. Right. It's like, you don't become a quantum tech CEO or CTO one day by waking up and deciding that you want to be a quantum tech CTO. You become one by, in a purposeful way, doing things that enhance your visibility and enhance this area of serendipity. And then the offer comes along, and then you have to decide if that vehicle, right, if the vehicle of a startup is the correct way for you to realize your ideas or not. But saying, I want to be a quantum CEO, and how do I get to that point, for me is really putting the cart before the horse, as it were.
Can I just jump a little bit? And I think I would also like to probably make a small comment, because I've typed an answer which probably has disappeared now from the open answers on the skills. So I'd like to touch on both of those. So like if you have an ambition of being a CEO per se, for example, I want to be a CEO, go and do it. I mean, that's my advice. And what skills if you think that you want to be a CEO, you've got to find a way, and that's obviously the people skills. You have to be able to sell, and to sell means you have to be really good at spotting the problem and how to solve it, and how to fulfill everybody's dreams at the same time. Your dreams, investors' dreams, your employees' dreams, everything, your customers' dreams. That's the main thing. How do you fulfill all that stuff? And the better you are at that, the more successful you will be. And if you want to be, exactly a CEO or run a startup, then probably shouldn't focus just on quantum. I mean, that's perfectly sensible to want to do that. But if you don't limit yourself, there's plenty of other stuff that's exciting for that matter. If you really believe in quantum tech, then probably you have to consider different options, of course. Maybe it's not the CEO, but if you want to develop technology, be part of something, But yeah, you have to be very purposeful about this, and you have to be very clear about this. And if you see a problem and you think you can solve it with quantum, that's your time.
I think if you just to jump in there, sorry, I think if you develop exactly those skill sets, regardless of whether you find yourself in a position to start a company and be the CEO of that company, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. You've already made yourself so utterly employable, or utterly flexible into the trajectories that you can go into, that it doesn't really matter. I think you've already won. You've already got very rare technical knowledge, and you've combined it with the very effective ability to work with people. So you will be snatched off of the employment whatever and brought into many companies will want you, basically, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to know my experience how I became a CEO, I just came one day and filed my notice and said that's it. the people ask what you're going to do, I'm like, I'm going to be CEO. And that's how it happened. I mean, it's really short story. And in terms of the other skill sets, I'm actually going to drop a link in the Slack now. There's another really nice article AegiQ from Canada put together. So she interviewed quite a few. It's about more if you want to get employment in quantum tech.
I saw that, yeah.
So she did this in January, but I think it's got a really nice summary to get you at least thinking about. So it covers different areas. So I would if anybody's interested, please do read that. So that's the answer to one of the questions I was typing in. And yeah, it's really feasible to get a job just in quantum tech if you're just a graduate. You don't have to have a PhD. Well, we hire graduate engineers if you want.
All right, great. Thanks for your answers, everyone. So moving on, we have a question. How the quantum field can benefit from industry and academia research. Is the future of this field in collaboration between both sides, or maybe to merge them via startup coming from universities?
I think just speaking from my background, which I guess also you could say was more nanoscience rather than quantum. The reason we have a building in Bristol called the Nanoscience and Quantum Information Building, the NSQI, and that it's filled with quantum researchers and not nanoscientists, is because nanoscience failed to make the link, failed to make the handshake between government pumping in lots of funding into it, generating lots of interesting tech, and industry actually finding some use for it. I think a lot of researchers don't really appreciate that the government is making investments into areas because it wants to see a return on that investment to UK PLC, right? To the people, the taxpayer at the end of the day. And if those ideas are fantastic, but they remain blue skies and don't have any economic, commercial, whatever, societal benefit, then that money slowly goes away. And that's exactly what happened in nano, and why we kicked all those, dirty nanoscientists out of the NSQI and moved in all the quantum guys, because quantum became the next hotbed of innovation. Same thing almost happened to synthetic biology in the UK. So I think it's really important that the handshake between industry and academia happens and is very, very, very close. And what you see if you talk to a lot of TTOs is that although they have fantastic quantum ideas coming from their senior researchers, industry isn't actually ready just yet, oftentimes, to grab those packages and run with them. It's not as simple a case of like throwing it over the fence or publishing something about it and then assuming that it will go somewhere. I really think that startups or spin-outs are a really elegant mechanism to do the little bit of further finessing that is required to either then get the idea into the marketplace or get it acquired by those industry groups. But that's what keeps the finance flowing into that field of research. The idea that interesting stuff does come out of it. And you know, going back to our grant funding discussion, right? The main change in grant funding at the moment is that impact statement. Like, how do you actually see a return on the money that we are going to be giving you? And increasingly, it will be the academics. Like, this isn't true of the academics of today, maybe, but the academics of tomorrow will be the ones that have work that has patentability around it, that has the ability to like commercially exploit it. So if you can clock that early and make sure the things that you are working on fit within that bubble, there will be significant amount further funding opportunities, whether they are industry collaborations or whether they're just grant funding that come your way. So I think it's really important to kind of understand how that landscape is changing.
Well, I mean, I think if I speak a little bit more sort of to the academic self-interest, then something that I've noticed is that there is this kind of sort of very simplified, very naive picture that, you know, we all hear about in undergrad of, you know, there's basic research, which gets turned into applied research, which gets turned into industrial research, which gets turned into products, right? And my experience so far has been that that is really not how it works, and that there is, you know, you could draw that diagram between those things and there would just be arrows going everywhere. And so if I then, you know, speak to that just from the sort of narrow academic self-interest, I would say the basic research that you can do is also being pushed further along by the fact that you have companies, right? So the fact that you can now get, for example, single photon detectors as a commercial, like just speaking about quantum optics for the moment, which I think is sort of what most people's background here is, you know, the fact that you could now buy single photon detectors as a commercial thing, looking at that from the point of view of an academic, that's a great time saver, right? So, and that then allows you to do things scientifically that you would not be able to do if you didn't have that time saver. So I think it's much more, rather than that it's like a straight line of, okay, you start with fundamental research and you sort of work your way down. It's sort of much more that all of these things build on each other. And that's something, yeah, exactly as Ben says, that's, you have to relate to that somehow. You have to show that you are a useful player in that web in some sense.
Look, I'm gonna jump in again with the link. But there's, I think it's really true that there's no linear relationship, like it's not a singular or simple relationship, because deep tech is there's a reason why it's deep or tough. So it involves many stakeholders, and they have to align between themselves and they balance out, because there's an ecosystem. So it cannot be done just by commercial parties. It cannot be done just by universities. You know, so there's it's something playing together. So there's this thing from BCG, which I find, I've just posted again on Slack, which I find quite good illustration to the thing. But the point is that you know, when you create any business, any commercial entity is about creating value, and that's one way of doing things, and this is how our economies work. Now, it's not exactly the way you develop scientific knowledge, because the aim of universities and academia is to create new knowledge, to discover new things. There's not necessarily value as economic value in it immediately. And so you have to have that transition, that handshake. But at that point, it actually changes priorities quite significantly. Like if you don't create any value with that thing, it doesn't mean anything in commercial sense. And that's really important. And that's also like in terms of the skill set that you have and your mindset. When you work in academia, you're after something exciting, some new ideas, something great. When you're doing product development in the company, it's still research, but it's very different kind of, I mean, you might end up doing the same experiment actually in the lab somewhere, but the reason why you do it is very different and the context is very different. You're trying to solve a problem. We're trying to help somebody solve their pain with your technology. But it's not the technology itself that's, people don't know about the technology. You need to solve it. Do you need to offer them help with something with your technology?
So yeah, thanks for those answers. So let me I'll ask another question that we've got here, which is kind of related. So the question is, what survival rate / level of consolidation do you predict there to be for many quantum spin-outs that we see today? And I suppose that's kind of related to the last question in the sense that, like, are we honouring this handshake enough at the moment, or might we all go the way of kind of nanoscience? So yeah, what do the panel think of that?
I mean, yeah, a lot of these things will crash and burn. It's fine. It doesn't matter. I think all that speaks to is that you need a really good, cheap system to be testing ideas commercially, and it's honestly why I think building companies around master's students, PhD students is the way academia should operate. It's very expensive to take an senior academic out of a lab and say sit in this company X amount of time. It's much cheaper, much more lightweight, and much more agile to get a bunch of fresh face, still arguably quite cheap and low risk in terms of don't have a mortgage or anything like that, groups together and try more ideas. Because I think I think even if the company doesn't work, that group will have still learned a significant amount out of that exercise. And as long as they are retained by that ecosystem, that quantum ecosystem, they will make the next generation of these quantum companies better. If you look at a place like Silicon Valley, it's as good as it is because they've had so many utter failures, but all of those folks have stayed around and joined the next things and led all of that, added all of that kind of learned knowledge into the collective pool and made the next propositions X% stronger. So yeah, I imagine there will be a bunch of things failing. There's already a few of them that I've heard of that are dropping like flies at the moment, which is fine. I don't think that's anything to worry about. I think it's good to have activity. The important thing is that we don't get ourselves on the wrong side of the hype curve and that it all blows up too quickly. We need some successes, which really is why I think a lot of the quantum inspired tech like QLMs, like Fluoritiques, if you're a Bristol local, you've probably heard of them, are really interesting companies because they have total market now relevance, not market 5 years, 10 years from now relevant. So it just de-risks the proposition a bit, and you need some of those sorts of companies as well as the quantum softwares, the new quantum architecture sort of companies to all be thrown into the mix.
All right, thanks, Ben. I'll go on to the next question from Carl Hutchins, which is, what was the biggest challenge you faced when you first moved from academia to industry? Maybe I could start with that one. Well, I mean, I've only kind of got one foot in the door in industry so far, so I guess I might find out more in the coming months. I guess, like some of us have said before, so one thing I've kind of really noticed is, yeah, you're kind of much more focused in industry, and you've really got to kind of do something and tackle a real world problem. Whereas in academia, you can kind of just wander around kind of exploring whatever happens to interest you that day, and kind of that all counts as good work in academia. Of course, you have to publish papers, but kind of any research, counts as good work. And of course, that's not quite the same in the company because it has to be more focused. So far for me, that's kind of been not exactly a surprise, but the thing that's taken a bit of getting used to for me. So anyone else have any insights on this?
I mean, I guess for me, sorry, Max, I jumped in there in front of you. I guess for me, because I joined a small-ish startup, I was like hired as, I mean, my job title said lead physicist, but what it meant was does a bit of literally everything. So like, you know, anything from just building the website to managing the cash flow, or to working out how we pitch to investors, or how we find those investors in the first place. I mean, I had like crisis of capability over like, how do I even send an email to these people and like word it so I sound like a sensible human being. I think like that is the main challenge in stepping out into the real world, that you've been totally unprepared during undergrad, master's, whatever, PhD, to actually engage in that way, in the world, in the way the real world, in inverted commas, actually wants to kind of talk to you. So I think that, I mean, that was the biggest challenge for me, but I think all of those things are very like learnable, and I think that's why it benefits masters or PhDs to move into that world so well, because over your PhD, say, you've focused very, very, very deep into something very specific, so you're already really good at learning to the forefront of knowledge, and to move that knowledge out into the world, you need a bunch of what I usually call like 5-minute topics, you know, like how do I do whatever, how do I hire an employee, what does their employment contract need to look like, how do I set up a pension scheme, how do I like file my taxes, how do I file my VAT, like dumb stuff, but there's just 100 million of them, right? And it takes a little, you know, I'm still learning things even like 4 years into this process, 4 years out of the PhD, but that's like the biggest hurdle. But the thing is, don't be scared about it, because it's utterly attainable, all of that knowledge, especially if you've gone through something like a PhD. You're already very well versed at learning things that are difficult. These things aren't too difficult, there's just a lot of them.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, you just need to be comfortable going out of your comfort zone. So there will be a lot of new, unknown, but you know, if you know what you're after, that, as Ben said, you know, you've done a PhD already. I mean, figuring out how to file a tax, or, you know, indeed, like what's the lingo that you use in, let's say, business email versus academic email? Well, it takes 2 emails or like 3 emails, and you figure it out. First time, you don't be afraid to sound stupid or do something stupid. I mean, you will. It's fine. But the sooner you do and learn on it, that's fine. Nobody's gonna care too much about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll repeat something that I said 2 years ago as well. If you think that the world is waiting for physicists to tell them how the world should be run, then please, for the love of God, stay in your lab, right? And a lot of these things, you can also, you know, there are people who have made it their job to get these things right, you know. So I have, and I guess my experience is a little bit different than Ben's in that respect. I have never had to worry about the tax returns or, you know, any of the employment contracts or any of these things, because I teamed up with a serial entrepreneur who has already done this 17 times before, right? So that's also a choice that you can make. But what I do think is really important is that you should not bring too much ego with you in that sense. Right, so you should be aware of the fact that, you know, where earlier on you were maybe the king of a very, very tiny hill, right, which is ultimately what a PhD is about. Now you're going to be thrown in this world where you have sort of very, very different people who all communicate in very different ways and who have all maybe very different expectations, not just from you, but also from each other. Right? So it's a much more heterogeneous world that you're being thrown into. And you have to be open to that, and you have to be receptive to that, and you have to be willing to accommodate that.
I think just to re-cement that point, like a good piece of advice I was given was the second you find someone better at being the CEO than you, hire them, because your life will be much better and your company will be much more successful. And that's something that I've always like tried to keep close to my heart, because when you start things, obviously they feel quite personal to you, and you feel quite protective of them, and actually like get rid of all that protectiveness. Like I think a good mindset is that startups, spin outs, anything, there's always something fundamentally flawed about what it is they're doing, and their job is to work that out quicker than they run out of money. So always assume something is fundamentally broken and that you need to be, diligent in finding it. And that's why I think, scientific background lends itself very credibly to doing that activity.
Yeah, and startups are a means, not an end, right? Because that's something that I hear from a lot of people as well, that they say, oh, I want to be in a startup, right? Or I want to be the CEO of a startup. And then you ask why, and they just don't have an answer, right? It's just the cool factor or the prestige. And, this comes a little bit back to this point of if you find someone, I'm going to steal that one, by the way. If you find someone who's better than you at being the CEO, you should hire them, right? I mean, the company is there to produce some results. It's not there to bring you further. So I think that's a really good piece of advice.
Okay, thanks everyone. It's 2 o'clock now, I'm afraid, and I see Alex is back, so we might have to leave it there.